Good evening and welcome, everyone. My name is Fida Daly, and I'm the director of the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies and the Clovis and Hala Maksoud Chair in Arab Studies. Tonight, our featured speakers, Yuli Novak and Kareem Jubran, are from Beit Salem, an Israeli human rights organization that works to oppose Israel's occupation and apartheid regime through documentation, research, and advocacy on human rights violations in this system. They will be joined by Khaled Elgindy, a professor here in the Arab Studies program and a visiting scholar. This evening's event was organized by our center, the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies, and co-sponsored by the African Studies program, the Alwaleed Center for Muslim Christian Understanding, and the Arabic and Islamic Studies Department. So in July of 2025, Beit Salem released a report, Our Genocide, which stated, quote, an examination of Israel's policy in the Gaza Strip, together with statements by senior Israeli politicians and military commanders about the goals of the attack, leads to the unequivocal conclusion that Israel is taking coordinated, deliberate action to destroy Palestinian society in the Gaza Strip. This evening, Beit Salem's director, Yuli Novak, and Beit Salem's field research director, Kareem Jubran, are joined by Khaled Elgindy for a discussion about this report and the ongoing genocide in Gaza, what can be done to stop it, as well as to hold Israel, the state of Israel, to account. I begin with a brief introduction of each of the speakers, and then I will hand it over to my colleague Khaled to facilitate the discussion. Initially, both Yuli Novak and Kareem Jubran are going to give some introductory remarks. So just briefly about each of our speakers this evening. Yuli Novak is the executive director of Beit Salem, a lawyer by training. She holds both an LLB and an LLM from Tel Aviv University. Yuli previously served as executive director of Breaking the Silence, leading efforts to expose Israeli soldiers' testimonies from the occupied territories. She is the author of the memoir, Who Do They Think You Are?, and a prominent advocate for ending Israel's occupation and apartheid regime. In 2024, Novak addressed the United Nations Security Council. She has since been widely featured in leading international news programs, high-profile opinion pieces, and prominent publications. Kareem Jubran is Beit Salem's field research director. Kareem joined the organization as a field researcher in 2004 and became director of the department in 2009. Prior to joining the organization, Jubran pursued a career in education as a lecturer in sociology at an academic college in Ramallah. He holds a BA and an MA in sociology from Sofia University in Bulgaria. Jubran serves as a board member of the Palestinian Counseling Center, an NGO devoted to developing and improving mental health concepts and services in Palestine. And he is also on the board of directors of the Palestinian Human Rights NGO in San. Khaled Elgindy is a visiting scholar and adjunct instructor at Georgetown University's Center for Contemporary Arab Studies. He's also the author of the 2019 book, Blind Spot, America and the Palestinians from Balfour to Trump. Elgindy previously served as the director of the Middle East Institute's Palestine program from 2020 until 2025. From 2010 through 2018, he also served as a resident scholar in the Foreign Policy program at the Brookings Institution. Prior to arriving at Brookings, he served as an advisor to the Palestinian leadership in Ramallah on permanent status negotiations with Israel from 2004 to 2009. And was a key participant in the Annapolis negotiations of 2007 to 2008. Before beginning, I'm going to briefly read the speech and expression policy of Georgetown University. Thank you for coming to the session. Georgetown University is committed to standards promoting speech and expression that foster the maximum exchange of ideas and opinions. While it is recognized that audience members may not share the same views as the speakers, it is expected that everyone in attendance at this event will respect the right of the speaker and the organizing department and departments to share their perspectives and ideas and not cause a disruption of the event's activities. At the end of the event, there will be opportunity for question and answer. And we have quite a number of people online too, just to let you know. And without further ado, I will hand it over to our colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think let's go ahead and hear from our guests. I don't know which order you want to go in.
I'll start.
Okay, great.
All right. So hello everybody, and it's really good to be here. And just to have the opportunity to speak to you. But not at a good time. For us, we're actually here at probably one of the most dangerous and critical moments that we had in our lives. So you heard from Fida a bit about the background of Kareem and myself, and I'll tell you a bit about the organization, the organization we're part of, and then maybe we'll talk a bit more about the report we published about the genocide and the situation on the ground in Israel, Palestine. So B'Tselem has been around for more than 35 years. It's an Israeli organization documenting, researching, investigating violations of human rights against Palestinians under Israel occupation and apartheid. It's an Israeli organization, but obviously Kareem and I sitting here together, it is quite unique in the sense that we're Israelis, Jewish Israelis and Palestinians who are working together in a shared struggle. I'm saying unique because in the current situation in Israel-Palestine, it is something that is quite rare to find. This common conversation and for sure common struggle for a fundamental change is very rare in a polarized society as we live in, and we can talk more about that. Both of us and many of our colleagues been working for many years, for decades, in this struggle, in this effort to protect human rights, and nothing prepared us to what we experienced and the situation we found ourselves in the past 2 years. And calling something a genocide is not something that you do lightly, but that's the situation we got to. So I want to start not with the genocide, but actually with the situation we're now in, because that's the most dangerous and critical situation that we want to talk about. 5 weeks ago, a ceasefire deal was announced, and when we look and the reality on the ground, the place in our homeland, nothing, it can be called ceasefire, but the fire didn't stop. Not in Gaza, not in the West Bank, and not inside Israel. So the violence did change scale in Gaza, and we'll talk about it in a minute, but we're talking about 5 weeks in which more than 250 people were killed in the Gaza Strip by Israel. More than 1,500 buildings, houses were destroyed inside Gaza. Medical aid and humanitarian aid that was supposed to get in don't get in. 75% of what was agreed upon doesn't get into the enclave. So the situation in Gaza, actually the fire goes on, right? And at the same time, in the West Bank, that is also under Israel control, the violence that is just rising from day to day for the past 2 years is also increasing. I'm saying that because, or I'm saying it's the most critical moment we've been in, because as the violence goes on, there is a sort of feeling here in the US, in Europe, in other parts of the world, and also inside Israel, that things have come down, that we're in a good direction. And we're not. Not only because the violence continues, because the criticism over Israel is kind of lowering down because of this feeling, but most important, because a genocide has been conducted without anyone being held accountable for it, with full impunity, and life just goes on. And that's a very, very dangerous situation to be in, because this violence can erupt again at every moment, and while we are sitting here, and we know that. So I want to talk about the genocide, and we want to take our time to delve into what we know about the Israel genocide over Gaza, what we call Our Genocide, and we can explain about why we chose that name as well. So I would say, like, the few months into the attack, the Israeli attack over Gaza, I think many of us, or most of us, understood that we are facing a whole new reality. For each of us on a personal level, I think it kind of caught us in a different moment. I know each of us have a story. When did you realize that this is it, that we are in a new reality? And again, on a personal level, we can go into that. But I think the most important thing to understand is that genocide really is a new paradigm in which there is an attack, a total attack on a group in order to destroy a group. And that's also the meaning, the real meaning of genocide. It doesn't mean necessarily that the system that is in power is meant to kill each and every person within the group. It attacks. But it does mean that the system in power have the intent to destroy the group as such. Now, when we're talking about genocide, we're talking about actually this word have more than one meaning, right? Yeah. First of all, it is a political or sociological phenomena that was there for many, many years and hundreds of years, in which, again, system that is in power is targeting a group in order to destroy. In 1948, the word genocide also got a new meaning, and that is the legal definition as a crime, as a legal crime under international law, which is very in much accordance with the definition that I just said. The unique in this phenomena is, first of all, again, the intention towards the group. And the second thing is the fact that the people, the individuals that are being targeted, each and every one of them basically can do nothing to avoid being targeted because it's not personal. The fact that you are part of a group, that's what makes you a target. You cannot, it does have nothing to do with what you did personally, did or didn't do. Just because who you are, it's a matter of identity. When we thought, I said a few months into this attack, we realized it's a genocide, and then we had to ask ourselves, as a human rights organization, as an Israeli human rights organization, and as an organization of Israelis and Palestinians, what is our role in fighting a genocide? And I have to tell you personally, that's a question that I never thought I would ask myself. I mean, who does think that we'll face such a moment that we have? How do we fight a genocide? How do we struggle in the face of genocide? Many Palestinian organizations and international organizations by then and for sure by July this year already published reports and wrote and described Israel conduct as genocide, including a legal analysis published by Amnesty International and UN bodies and others, identifying Israel conduct as genocide. And when we ask ourselves how can we be most efficient in this struggle, we understood that what we can do is actually bring together the two perspectives that genocide has, because genocide has the victims, but also a system that conducting the genocide. Us as Palestinians and Israelis who come from both groups, from the group of the perpetrators, from the people who are doing the genocide, and from the group of the victim, and part of the group of the victims, can explain or can bring forth both the voices of the victims, which is the most important thing to do, but also to explain something about the machinery that how this thing works. Because again, it's not the first genocide in history, but each and every genocide throughout history had its specific characteristic. And we believe it's important to understand a system in order to struggle against it. And that's what we try to do in our report. So I'll say it very in general, and then Kareem will delve into some of the examples on the ground. But our genocide, this report is actually have two parts. The first part is trying to build almost a model the genocide, to understand this specific genocide. And the way we understand it after researching it and exploring it, collecting data, analyzing the data, is understanding that this attack, this intentionally attack over the Palestinians in Gaza have four main parts. One is the mass killing and physical harm that is being inflicted over the people. The second is the mass destruction that we all know from the footages of just the ruin, the flatten of Gaza. The third is the forced removal, the mass forced removal of people, right? 2 million people that were being moved around. And the fourth leg is the total destruction of society, just taking apart society by different means. And if you take all these four legs together, add to them an umbrella of dehumanization and constant incitement to genocide that we heard from the first day of the attack, right after Hamas attack on October 7th, until today. It is very much characterized the public discourse, the public Israeli discourse. So this is the first part of the report. The second part of the report, which we might talk a bit later, is more about understanding how we got there. Because genocide is not something that starts in one day out of thin air. It's something that every genocide throughout history had some previous conditions that enabled it to become what it was. And we believe that, again, in order to struggle this, you have, and to really struggle not only the phenomena itself, but the system that created it, that operates it, you have to understand also the background and how we got there. So we can talk a bit about that later. Come in.
So good evening, everybody. As I be told that I worked for Bethlehem almost 21 years. Along these years, we document thousands of human rights violations, crimes against Palestinians, me and my team in Bethlehem. But we never dreamed, and even in our most worst nightmares, we didn't imagine that we will reach such as buoyant. We passed 2008 when Israel killed about 1,400 Palestinians, 2014, 2,400 Palestinians, the March of Return, hundreds of young people being killed. But what happened after the 7th of October is different from each circle of violence carried out before that. Immediately after the 7th of October, the statements of the Israeli officials, starting from Netanyahu, when he talk about killing Amalek, which is a biblical story connected with genocides in the past, to the Minister of the Defense, which he called people in Gaza that they are animals, and he will cut and stop the food supplies, water, and electricity from the people of Gaza, these animals, to the President of Israel, which he talked that there is no innocent people in Gaza. So they blame everybody in Gaza what happened in the 7th of October. Following the mass destruction of Gaza starting, the mass killing of people in Gaza starting, that's why we reach this huge number of fatalities in Gaza. We talk about 67,000 shaheeds or murders in Gaza, which is the minimum number. The fact says that there is much more people buried under the rubble of the buildings. For example, we have our field researcher, Ulfat Kurd, her brother with his wife and their daughter. They're being killed in the beginning of the war while they targeting the house which they stay in. And until this moment, their bodies under the rubble. And like this family, hundreds of families that are still under the rubble. Out of the 67 fatalities, there's 20,000 kids. There is 12,500 women that says that the number of the civilians being killed in this war is huge. From other side, we can say about 2,700 families wiped out completely. Other 6,020 families wiped out except one family member. And you don't, if there's a time we will briefly read from one of the testimonies of one of the victims, which she talked about that. Plus that, we can talk about the psychological damage of the people living under the daily and night attacks, targeting from the earth, the huge explosions. Imagine kids living in such a situation. And I have a friend living in Gaza. While I talking to him, he told me that his dream was to die with his kids and with his family from the beginning of the war, and not to suffer all these months, the starvation, the fears, the displacement from place to other place. And this dream, or this many people in Gaza think that in this way. That's why we didn't die from the first days of the war, and we can say all this suffering during the war. Also, if we talk about the infrastructure in Gaza, more than 80% of the buildings in Gaza being destroyed completely. The infrastructures, the streets, the electricity, the water networks, the electricity networks, also destroyed completely. The displacement of the people, each family in Gaza, they're being displaced times after times after times, and there is a families which they displaced more than 10 times. Each time when they go to an area which they thought that it's a secure area, they had to move ahead to other area and carrying their poor things from place to place. And in some cases, they just escaped away without their tent, without their stuff and their things. Also, we can't ignore the huge number of the injuries, which is more than 100,000 injuries, more than 4,800 people. They just lose one of their legs. About 18% of them are kids. Imagine the life of these people under the attack all the time, with the lack of the medical treatment. That we can consider as a real disaster. The targeting of the health facilities out of 38 hospitals in Gaza, there is about 16 hospitals which is functions particularly, not in full capacity. The starvation, which is used in very tough way as a weapon in this war against the civilians, and the number of the people that they died from hunger and the lack of food, there are at least 330 people being killed. 119 of them are kids. And they use that for a very long time. And many people, they die while they're trying to get food for their families. If we talk about the situation in the West Bank, it's almost the same. Of course, it's not in the same way of the violence, but still they used the international attention to Gaza and what happened in Gaza in order to achieve and to make the situation in the West Bank real catastrophe. Since the 7th of October until the beginning of October, Israeli army killed more than 1,000 Palestinians in the West Bank. Israeli forces, they bring the Gaza model to the West Bank while they bombing the camps in the north of the West Bank, and they displaced more than 40,000 Palestinians from their houses in Jenin refugee camp and in Kareem refugee camps. And until this moment, they didn't allow them to return back to their houses. The daily abuses and attacks which carried out by fascist militias, Israeli citizens armed with weapons, M16 and different weapons, attacking the Palestinians in daily basis. And these guys, they are supported by the Israeli army. They are supported by the Israeli politicians. They have all the resources in order to attack the Palestinians. For main goal is to ethnic cleansing the West Bank. And until this moment, more than 45 communities being displaced with a total amount of 2,700 inhabitants in these small communities. And they continue doing that, and they continue attacking the Palestinian villages and burning houses, burning properties. Every day, we document at least 10 attacks among the West Bank. The field research team, for example, they cannot cover all these attacks because it's a very large number of attacks. But the goal of these attacks is not just violence, it's a violence with a very clear agenda to ethnic cleansing the West Bank, to push the Palestinians inside enclaves and inside ghettos. And the last thing about the harvest season this year, more than 90% of the Palestinians, they didn't reach their fields in order to harvest the olives. And many of the Palestinians, when they reach their land, they discovered that the settlers cut their trees or they steal the olives from the trees. And here, maybe later we can talk about the prisoners, which is also other huge story and other part of the humiliation and torture, and which is.
Yeah. I just add two small things, and then, you hear all that, and I'm sure that some of you ask yourself, how come this sort of violence can take place? And I know I asked myself, how did we get there? And if you ask the average Israeli, or probably most Israelis, what's the story? They will tell you a story that starts on one day, on October 7, 2023. Now, October 7 attack was, for me personally, and for every Jewish Israeli I know, the scariest day and the most traumatizing day of my life. This attack was a criminal attack and horrifying attack that was directed towards civilians, and it resulted in 1,200 people killed, vast majority of them civilians, with 250 people kidnapped to the Gaza Strip. It was a very traumatic day. But we believe, and I personally believe, that to start and tell the story from that point is a very, very wrong thing to do and a very dangerous thing to do, because nothing started in that day. And part of a tragedy is exactly that, is this mindset. We live all of us in Israel, Palestine live for almost 80 years under a regime, under a system of oppression, a system that was from its establishment in 1948 was oriented to preserve supremacy of one group over the other. It did that throughout the years by different means of control, of military occupation, of separation, of oppression of different kinds, ethnic cleansing, you name it. There was a toolkit. Above all, it is a system of apartheid. And one of the characteristics of system of apartheid is that when you are part of the group that was marked as superior, like I am, like the Jews in Israel, you're also instilled with a sort of blindness. I was born in Israel into a system of apartheid without knowing it, without being able to see it. And when I'm talking about the tragedy of the Israel people, my people, I think this is part of it, because October 7, the attack of October 7 was seen by most Israelis as a military failure, instead of understanding it as a political and social failure in an effort to preserve a system that is built on violence and oppression, while being sure that you can keep the violence on one side of the fence, you can keep the Palestinians in Gaza under siege, dehumanize them, attack them every few years in a ongoing military operation, killing hundreds and thousands of people, and keep people safe on the other side of the fence, and this violence won't spill over. It never happened throughout history, and it didn't happen in Israel. And in that sense, we almost missed an opportunity to understand something. But that's not the only thing that made this genocide possible. What made it possible, first and foremost, is the conditions. 80 years of everything I talked about. 80 years living under a system of violence and oppression. And that's the topic we're talking about today, the main issue of impunity. Throughout the decades, Israelis got almost close to full impunity for hurting Palestinians, either doing it on a systematic level when it's the policy itself, or when people on the ground, either soldiers or civilians, doing it. And that brought us into October 7 and into the reaction. October 7 attack instilled in Israel is not only trauma, but also the want to revenge, and also the very strange and disastrous notion that if it's a military failure, what we need to do in order to keep ourselves safe is just do more than what we did before and do it better. So more separation, more violence, more oppression, and add to that the final piece, and that is our current government. Israel now got to October 23 with the most right-wing government it ever had. Now, this government was chosen by the people, right? It's not that it came out of thin air itself. It shows something about the sentiment of the people. And in this government, we have hardliners that for them, the attack over Gaza was a clear opportunity to fulfill an agenda of resettle the entire land, of ethnic cleansing, of kicking out the Palestinians, of instilling this Jewish superiority, and they're saying it very clearly and very openly. And in that sense, what happened, the way I see it, what happened on October 23 is that I call it all the stars from our nightmares aligned and enable this system to move from a system of oppression in all kinds of forms and kind into a system that have a new tool. Now it's in its toolkit, and it's the worst tool a nation can have, and that is a genocide. And now, just to end it, if we're talking about a ceasefire or whatever you want to call the situation now, Israel as a political system already know how to commit a genocide. if Israel, as long as Israel won't be held accountable as a system, as people, and the leaders, and the soldiers, and everyone who took part in this thing, for what it did, it means that genocide can be just something that happened, and life goes on, and we can go on. And my last sentence is that it's not only a matter of Israel-Palestine, in our view, because if you normalize genocide and if you legitimize genocide in one place, it means that now the entire world is at risk to be under these circumstances. Stop here.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for the comments you shared, but most importantly, thank you for writing this report. It's an extremely important contribution to the discussion. It's difficult to read, but absolutely necessary. I have so many questions for you, but I know we also we want to have time for questions from our audience. So I'm gonna start small and then move to the sort of widen the lens a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So your report is part of a growing consensus among scholars, experts that describe the events that we've seen over the last 2 years as a genocide. You mentioned the Amnesty, also Human Rights Watch, and others. What was the tipping point for B'Tselem? Since this was just this past summer that your report came out, was there a moment at which you decided, okay, now we know? I mean, I remember the first expert, I suppose, to come out was Raz Sigal that I read in English, at least, who within 6 days of October 7th had published a piece called Textbook Case of Genocide. And of course, he's a Israeli-American Jewish Holocaust and genocide scholar. So what was the tipping point for B'Tselem that you decided now, or was it just a matter of doing the groundwork, and so that takes a lot of time?
Yeah. So say a few things. First, a genocide is not an event, it's a process, right? So in that sense, sometimes we've been asked when the genocide started. Of course, looking back, we know that it started on October 8th, 2023. But that's looking back. To tell you that on October 8th, we knew it's a genocide? No, I didn't. We knew just from the beginning that this attack going to be in a different scale. But I have to say that I personally, and think most of us, believed that it's going to stop. For many weeks, I remember talking and saying, okay, it's going to be worse than the previous cycle of attack over Gaza, but I wouldn't imagine that it will last for 2 years, more than 2 years. We were sure the world will stop it much before. I mean, and again, we're talking about the mass destruction and killing started in the first few days, right? So we're talking about thousands of people who got killed in the first days of the attack. And in that sense, I don't think B'Tselem as an organization had a moment. I think each and every one of us had a moment where it's not understanding that it is a genocide in the legal definition or even the sociological definition, just the understanding that we are in a completely new arena, in a new paradigm. Tell you, my personal experience, I'm sure Kareem will remember that. We had one staff meeting, and we meet on Zoom because we cannot meet all of us together in the same room because some people are in Gaza, some people in the West Bank are not allowed into Israel. So this is living under apartheid, right? Running organization under apartheid. And we met on Zoom, and we asked Muhammad, one of our field researchers from Gaza, to give a brief, Kareem asked him, right? The 10 minutes, kind of just give a sense of what's going on the ground in Gaza. And Muhammad is a serious guy, so he sat down and wrote in his notebook. And on Zoom, he started talking. And and he started telling us what takes place in Gaza, and he started talking about the fact that people need to send their kids to find food, but they're afraid that their kids will get shot, and then that people don't have shoes, so they are kind of working out a way to do that, and then that they don't have a way to cook, so how they operate the whatever, the stove, the alternative stove, and that they have to pay for gas, and went on, and then the fire and the bombing and the weather, and we just sat there, and I remember he finished talking after 10 minutes. It was silence. Everybody were silent, and I'm, as a director, supposed to hold this moment. I have no idea what to say. I am the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. The only thing that ran into my mind, that the only stories I heard about that were in such totality of destruction of life were from the ghetto, that I heard from my grandparents. And I remember, while trying to say something, I don't think I was able even to say anything because I see everybody crying on the Zoom. I thought, wow, we are in a new world. It's not what we knew before. It's the totality of things. It's and for me, again, it's not, since then there were thousands of moments when again and again I realized that it's a genocide, but I have to say that I also had to convince myself that it's a genocide, because it is something that almost physically I want to reject. I don't want to believe that this is where we are. Not because it's my country that is doing it, just because I don't want to believe that something like that is able to happen, right? So
In front of the eyes of the whole world.
And also, I think that the other thing that many others before us, they start to use the genocide as a technology and as whatever in the ground. I think that one of the things which makes us late to do that, we became shocked, everybody in the organization, from what happened, from what's going on in the ground. So all of us was being shocked for a long time. Second thing, we are trying all the time to bring materials and to try to build something different from the others. Okay, the legal definition of the genocide is known, and there were different experts argues if it's genocide or it's not genocide, if it's the element of the immunity, yeah, there or not there. And then we start to talking about the genocide as a sociological and political phenomenon, which is, it has a roots in the past and it continue in the future. And that's what the direction which we go in. We don't care about the legal division. It's very easy to prove that from legal point of view, because the politicians themselves, they convinced that, they talk about that many times and in many places. But we had to think about other way in order to bring the story of the genocide. And that's why if you look to the report, you will see that the report, it doesn't deal with the genocide just in Gaza. We deal with that the West Bank, there is a danger of, and the smallest trigger can bring the genocide into the West Bank. Even the Arabs inside Israel, they can be under the danger of the genocide. And maybe that's why it takes a long time, but at the end, we bring this thing to the world, and we are happy that we have this report. As
not happy, but
we're happy, not happy for that, but at least that we bring something different and something serious, something which we work together. And that's why we call the report Our Genocide. Our Genocide as a victims, as a Palestinians inside this organization, as our genocide as a people which the genocide carried out in their name. That's what's happening in the ground.
I want to come back to this point that you mentioned a moment ago, and you obviously discussed this in the report, that the genocide always occurs within a context.
Mhm.
And you, as you said, the genocide is a process. So this is quoted from the report. There are conditions that enable it, catalyzing events, and a guiding ideology. What is the broader context? You touched on this a little bit, but I'm going to ask a more pointed question. So what is the process that enabled this genocide in this case, and what is the guiding ideology in this case? Is it Zionism? Is the enabling ideology, or is it something else?
Hmm.
So that's the loaded part.
Yeah, no, thank you for this. Zionism is one of the words that mean very different things for different people. And for me personally, to grow up in a Zionist society, Zionist was never a political, growing up was never a political idea, was never even a political system. It was just an identity and something that was super positive, because Zionism is what brought my family, my grandparents, into safety, right? And enabled them to build the country that I'm part of. I never thought of, and I think most Israelis never thought that about the fact that this ideology is all, this political system that came out of this ideology is also a system that in order to build this country for my family and for people like me, oppress, dispossess, and appropriate the land and the rights of others, right? So that is something that, again, talking about apartheid and the blindness of apartheid, that is something that was out of the story. And as an Israeli, you have to go, I think, quite a long way in order to unlearn this kind of Zionism and to really see something that is beyond what you think of Zionism. So this word is really, I know for many people this is the essence of it, but I insist that it is a complex thing, because it is a political structure and a political movement that became something very, very cruel and very violent, but it is also identity of many people that really have to do something deep with who you are. But at B'Tselem, we identified the Israeli regime a few years ago as an apartheid regime. And apartheid regime have a very clear, and I mentioned it before, a clear ideological and intention and goal. And that is to preserve the supremacy of one group over the other, right? And it is doing that by different means, mostly by arranging the space demographically, and taking the space that is under control and start dividing it and organizing it in a way that enables you to preserve democracy for certain people, democracy in a sense that you preserve a majority of people on most of the land. And I can tell you that most Israelis really and truly believe that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, and that Israel is a democracy, right? Even though they are living under apartheid. So in that sense, what we understand is that the goal didn't change. The goal is still to preserve Jewish supremacy over the entire land. The means changed and shifted throughout the years. And in the past 2 years, as I said, there is a new tool, the most disastrous tool. And that is the tool of destruction, total destruction of the people. Now, still, it doesn't mean that that's the only tool in the, because as Kareem said, the ethnic cleansing in the West Bank is keep going, right? And the killing and the dispossession and the intimidation of Palestinians also inside 48, inside Israel, is still going. But if you ask about the central and main goal, I think it's to preserve Jewish supremacy in all aspects. And you know, something, it's not something good, it's something terrible, but at least Another thing that happened throughout the past 2 years or maybe 3 years since the current government was Israeli government was voted in, is that many of the masks and facade of the Israeli regime were taken off. And many of the things that we are saying now, it's not something that we need to reveal. All you need to do is to know Hebrew. Because if you listen to our official, to Israel minister, government members, commanders, generals, the people who run the state, they're saying it very, very clearly that the purpose is to keep they're not saying superiority, but they're saying the safety, the well-being of the Jewish people. That's the main and the only thing that run this machine. We know that the other side of it is to oppress Palestinians, because in the Israeli mindset, it is a zero-sum game. In order to keep us safe, we have to oppress the Palestinians. And it's been there, it's been like that since ever. Only the practices changes for the worse.
One of the things that struck me most about this whole nightmare of the past 2 years, this question of impunity. One thing I didn't appreciate was the extent to which not just the United States, but most of the West and much of the rest of the international community was heavily invested in sustaining Israeli impunity. Of course, we know the United States has a special relationship, and the United States is committed more than any other power in the world to shielding Israel from the consequences of its own actions. What I hadn't fully appreciated, except for over the last 2 years, was the extent to which almost every country in Europe is invested in sustaining the system of Israeli impunity. And the double standard between Ukraine and Palestine, it's all been discussed. But we have the International Court of Justice there's going to be a genocide trial. It's going to be on trial for genocide. We have a series of provisional rulings by the ICJ that following, that's been now 22 months since the first ruling that there was, these preliminary measures that have to be taken, and none of them have been implemented, not by Israel and not by the international community. And in fact, today we read the news that Germany is now right. They're no longer going to withhold any weapons, and this is so. Is this? I mean, it's hard to imagine there's going to be a genocide trial, and how could there be a trial and then not come? How could they not come to the same conclusion that B'Tselem and others have come to, that this is in fact a genocide? And then what would happen to all of these countries that were complicit at every stage of the genocide? It is, in other words, I guess the question I'm asking is impunity guaranteed? I mean, is there any, or maybe I'll put it a different way, is there any hope of accountability given how invested so much of the international community is in shielding Israel? Because they're not just shielding Israel, they're shielding themselves from the same consequences, right? If Israel is guilty of genocide, well, then they are guilty of complicity in genocide. So is there a realistic hope of some kind of accountability through the existing mechanisms of the ICC and ICJ?
I think we need to differ between two kinds of accountability. One is a legal accountability, and the other one is, and especially when we're talking about genocide, because it is also a political phenomenon of extreme political violence, there is some public accountability, right, of the people to demand this accountability. And Regarding the institution, the international legal institution, the ICC, ICJ, I really don't know, because as you know and we all know, it is a political game. And just as you said, there are many political actors, and right now we know that the US administration is in full support following Israel's steps in attacking, full attack over these institutions, including the UN and others. So I don't know. But if I have some hope, I think it lies on this concept notion of public accountability, because here we see something else. People around the world, in the US, but also in Europe, see something that politicians might see or not, but politicians are still playing the political game. And people rose up against, in hundreds of thousands, rose up and took the streets to demonstrate and to against Israel conduct. I believe because they saw something, because they saw on social media the results of this practice, and they stood up and say, this is not unacceptable. And so I really don't know what will happen with the ICC, the ICJ. I think I mean, we need to push as much as we can to make sure that this institution won't fall completely apart. But I put my hopes more on the people of the world, really, to understand that the situation in Gaza and in the West Bank and in Israel-Palestine is not only about Israel-Palestine. If you legitimize genocide in Palestine, you legitimize genocide everywhere. And, you know, we know the situation in the US right now. Things that none of us could have believed that happened in the US are happening right now, today, right? People are being arrested on the street, kidnapped on the streets. I mean, I don't need to tell you. You live here. You know the situation here. So I think that, you know, things that are, I said it earlier today, that the notion of creating concentration camps in Gaza is something that we couldn't think about before, and now we know that is a real thing. And if we legitimize it, I think people have this internal kind of intuitive understanding. If we legitimize this in Gaza, we are legitimizing it in other places. It can be right here outside your door. And in that sense, I think this is where my hope lies, in not in the fact that the politicians of the world and the leaders of the world, whatever they want to call themselves, will come up and stop it, but that the people will push them, will say this is unacceptable.
And I think that it's a part of all the colonialistic world, the world of the colonials, and that's why they don't want to give accountability about what happened in Gaza by the superpowers, because they are the same. They are the same. They've done that, and they maybe continue doing that in other areas in this world. And I think that the pressure of the streets in different capitals forced these governments to escape in order to lie their streets to the recognition of the Palestinian state, which is a symbolic act without any actions in the ground, doesn't mean anything. But I think that by this pressure, they escape there in order to run from the responsibility about the genocide that happened in Gaza. And I think that if we will keep this pressure in the streets, we can reach a real accountability. Without that, the political regimes, especially in Europe and here, they were not willing to judge the others, which they are the same point of view, especially the white supremacy. That's it.
Can I ask one more question before we go to the audience? Because this may be an unanswerable question, okay? But I feel it's important. So we see reports in the Western press, the testimonies of Israeli soldiers who have served in Gaza, basically admitting to their crimes. In some cases, they're video recording their own crimes, but there are also testimonies in which they talk about shooting civilians and so forth. Sometimes with remorse and sometimes without. We hear about suicides increasing among people who served in Gaza. What sort of a toll does genocide take on a society in terms of its social and moral fabric? What has, because it cannot simply be that, you know, Israelis have their rationalizations, they all accept what's happening, they support it, but deep down there's a price, there's a cost, right, to people's conscience and to the social fabric. Again, it might be something unanswerable, but to the extent that you could share, have you seen evidence of what is this doing to Israeli society?
Yes, I see it every day. I live inside Israeli society. It's a society full of fear, anger, violence, trauma. And trauma not only because of October 7th, but because we have hundreds of thousands of soldiers who came back from committing genocide, even if they won't call it that way, but they came back to the street and to their homes, to their families, right? And it's a society in which genocidal discourse, dehumanization of other people, legitimizing violence became the norm. And people don't even see it. If you open in any random day, Channel 12, which is the most watched channel TV in Israel, on 8 o'clock, the main news, the most watched news show. And if you know Hebrew or just try to translate it, you probably won't believe that this is the discourse. Really, we went so far in normalizing this kind of violent, racist, dehumanizing discourse that people are not even aware. And again, you know, I'm sitting here and I'm saying it not because I'm some kind of an enlightened person. That the only reason I know it is because I am one of the very few people in Israel, Palestine. I'm saying few because I think we're not more than thousands and maybe probably much less. That the Jews in the Israeli Jews that really live with Palestinians, right? Because I spend my day with Palestinians, that I'm not part of this polarization that is also an enabling factor for genocide, right? In every society, genocide took place. Polarization is a thing. And personally, I live in completely two parallel worlds, two parallel universes. One is the Israeli universe, in which there is one reality that, again, it's a harsh one. It's a harsh one. It's a painful one. It's a fearful one. It's not that people are happy and joyful. It's very, very victimized one. People see themselves as real victim of the situation, right? The ultimate victims. And there is the other world in which I live with Palestinians, and I think it's much closer to what you guys see when you look at the situation in Israel, Palestine. But it is a completely two different world. And if you ask about the price, I would say that's the price. To become a society that is so disconnected from what you are, what you're doing, from the reality we live in, is a very, very, very dangerous, and it's something that I really don't want for myself. I don't want it for my son. I don't think it's something that anyone deserves to live under.
Okay, so should we start with the room and then go to the virtual? Okay. I'm going to start with the order that I saw hands go up. This young woman in black.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. According to a 2025 Washington Post poll just from September, 39% of American Jews believe that what's happened in Gaza is a genocide. How do American Jews like myself leverage that to challenge the Jewish legacy institutions in the US? Like I'm thinking your AIPACs or ADL that have been complicit in this genocide and complicit in Israeli occupation and apartheid for the past several decades.
Take a few questions.
Or, yes.
Yeah, very relevant to the last discussion. It's the fact that an increasing number of Israelis are voting with their feet. In other words, emigrating from Israel, a hopeful sign.
Okay, and this young man, Green.
I have something that's kind of similar. It's also been said that a lot of Israelis are now voting with their pocketbooks as well. Do you see, I guess, a lack of confidence in the Israeli economy on the part of Israeli investors, and also a lack of confidence in the Israeli economy from investors around the world? Do you see that as a form of accountability? And also, what do you see as the potential or the limits of an continued economic boycott and divestment from Israel as a form of public accountability?
Okay, so let's cluster those three and then we'll wrap
Yeah,
up.
so I'll say a few things and then add. Yeah, okay. I'll start. So yeah, the Jewish thing. Thank you. So for the first question, how to leverage or how to act. I'm sorry that I don't have that's a hard question. The theoretical questions I can answer, but the practical one, really, we are in a new world, a new stage, I think, that we all need to analyze, to understand, and to rethink how we struggle within our communities and in partnership with others. And that's maybe what I want to say, is to insist on, I mean, as Jews, and I think as Israelis, of course, but as Jews also, we bear some kind of special responsibility over what is happening. But this responsibility is not only because the connection to Israel, but also because we have a voice that should be raised, that should be heard. Now, I know it's very hard because you also have the backlash once you speak out, right? But to insist on that and to insist on differing between Judaism and even Jewishness and the conduct of the state of Israel, and to insist that it cannot be, though Israel is trying very hard to make it one, right? To say what we are doing is in the name of all Jews around, and we are doing it to protect every Jew around the world, to insist that it is doing exactly the opposite. I truly believe that the state of Israel and the Israeli regime at the moment is probably the thing that puts all people, but also Jews, in risk more than anything else today in the world. So I would say just to speak out as much as you can and to do that. Regarding both the economic situation and the Israelis living.
How many have left? Do you?
I think we're talking about. I don't remember. I saw a publication. I think I don't want to say. Do you know?
Yeah,
It's
the numbers are like growing in compared to like a year ago, 50% more, and compared to before that, 50% more. I don't know the numbers, but the growth is 50% per year, which is great.
So yeah, and I can tell you. So it's also it's not even the numbers. It's the notion that people are very much into, I mean, around my environment, my social environment, everybody talking about it. I mean, it's become very obvious that Israel is not a good place to live in, not because of the moral consequences of what we're doing, just because it is becoming unlivable. Think about it again from the perspective of Israelis. I know it's hard to do that, but we were living through a war. They won't call it a genocide. they don't understand what they've been doing as a genocide, not at all. But we have been living throughout a war that made everybody's life miserable, really miserable. And I think many people stand up and leave because they say, we want better life for our kids. That's all. And we can find it in another place. And they don't believe that Israel will get back on track and be a good place to raise your kids.
I think the number is between 100,000 and 150,000.
Maybe, I don't know. Yeah.
I'd say if it reached 500,000, that's
Yeah.
it for Israel.
But I don't think the numbers, I don't know. I really don't. I don't think the numbers will rise to a point where the system will collapse. And also regarding the economic situation. So for now, not necessarily, Israel is in a quite stable economic situation at the moment. And I think talking about accountability, part of it, I mean, again, accountability have different aspects, and it can be demanded throughout different means and in different areas of life. And what we call for everyone is to do whatever in their power, wherever they are, as citizens and then as whatever you are, in order to stop this violent system from going on, right? And this violent and genocidal system from going on. I am careful about what I'm asking for because I do need to go back home, and I live in a very authoritarian system, as you heard. So I can't be more precise than that. But it is very clear for us that every person around the world and every institution should do anything in the power according within the terms of international law to push the Israeli system or to stop the Israeli system from keeping the oppression of the Palestinians.
Should we take a few questions online?
Sure, that would be good. There's a lot of questions
Okay.
Online. We've got a very large online audience. So let me just take a couple maybe to start with. Let's see. Okay, here's one. I'm interested in the answer too. So I'm interested in two seemingly divergent threads, and I wonder how the panelists might reconcile them. On the one hand, there's the assertion that we cannot begin to narrate events from October 7th, that there is a history that precedes it. On the other hand, we also talk about how things have dramatically changed since October 7th. How can we think of October 7th both as a turning point and still decenter that moment as the turning point? And I think there's the sense here too, I see from other questions is, does the genocide really start October 8th? Is it a much longer process? It's just been done in a gradual genocide versus a very focused genocide. Other attendees are very interested to hear how you are affected as employees or staff members of B'Tselem, both individually and in an organization, by the Israeli government. If you're being targeted in any way, if you, yeah, what backlash? So I'll stop there for now, and then there's more. But yeah.
So I'll take the first one, and Kareem will answer about the implication. Yeah. Okay, so this dilemma of or how to talk about things, because at the one hand we want to say things have changed. I mean, we see a transition on the ground, but at the same thing we know that nothing that we saw in the past two years is new. What new is the scale of it, and sometimes when the scale becomes so large, there is an essential change. It changes things, right? So the practices, everything was there before. Nothing that Israel have done, right? I don't think we saw one practice that we haven't seen before in a lower scale. But again, and this dilemma is something that within the organization we're also struggling and have a lot of conversation of whether to say it is new or is it a continuation. But I want to say something more about October 7th and about this moment and how we understand it. So if you look at genocide throughout history, most of them had some of catalyst event. Again, and I'm not saying it in order to justify anything. I'm just saying evident, like in the truth is that usually there is something that kind of event that pushes the system into doing into conducting a full-on genocide. And this is how we see October 7th, right? So in that sense, yeah, you cannot understand October 7th without understanding the context in which this political violence was conducted. And you cannot understand, we believe, you cannot understand our genocide, the Israeli genocide over Gaza and over the Palestinians, without understanding the meaning of October 7th as a catalyst event. And again, I'm not saying it in order to justify anything that happened after that or before that. I'm just saying that you cannot just jump above it if you really want to be truthful to what happened. And I have no idea what would happen if October 7th attack wouldn't succeed or wouldn't happen at all. If the Israeli army was really in place and stopped them, as probably Hamas expected, and everyone would have expected them to do, and not to be this kind of huge failure, military failure, because it was also a military failure, right? And so I really don't know. And if we had this kind of genocidal attack, well, no one can know. But the only reality that we live in is a reality in which October 7th did happen. It had a lot of implication on Israeli society. It did traumatize Israeli society, and it did serve as the ultimate justification for Israel for everything that he did after that. So by using, until today, every violent act that is, every act that is being done by Israel in the eyes of Israelis is justified because of October 7th. I tell you something more about Israel society and the effect of October 7th on it. You know, something that I heard from many of my friends, and it's quite painful to share it, but you can hear from Israelis saying that after October 7th, they lost their ability to empathy. That's something that I hear in Hebrew quite a lot. איבדתי את היכולת להיות אמפתי. From good people, right? From people that had the ability to be empathic. And you ask them, don't you care? Don't you see the starving kids in Gaza? And they say, since October 7, I lost my ability to empathy. And I think I just give it as an example to, again, in order to understand how a society becomes genocidal, you have to understand, in our view, the conditions, the previous conditions that enabled it, what made this kind of push forward, we call it in Hebrew a Romania, event that pushed things, that kind of moved things forward. And again, I'm not saying that this the reaction was the okay, I don't think I need to say that. So in that sense, I think October 7th is important. The October 7th attack is important to understand, and important to understand its meaning for Israelis. Whether this genocide started back then, again, if we look at genocide as a process, so I don't know, I think it's a more theoretical question, that interesting but theoretical. Where do you mark the starting point of a genocide? In the moment where the conditions that enabled it started, in the moment when a concrete attack started, in the first person that was killed, in the third person, in the 100 person that was killed, in the 1,000, I really don't know. But that's, for me, that's a theoretical question. What I do know is that Israel, for sure, conducted genocide, paradigmatic genocide, really something that checks all the criteria, and it has been doing so very clearly since October 2023.
And also on top of that, I think that the genocidal act, of course, it started years before by preparing the land, by dehumanizing the Palestinian, by looking to the Palestinians that he is not a human being, incitement against the Palestinians from politicians and even religious figures, rabbis, and something like that. That's opened the door and fixing the road to reach this point after the 7th of October. And other thing, I think that the lack of accountability about what happened before, for example, 2008, 2014, when Israel started to target houses and families inside the houses, and tens of families being completely erased, killed, and no one get accountable about that, and that's opened the appetite for more and more and more, because in 2008, 1,400 Palestinians being killed, 2014, 2,400 being killed, and the numbers became bigger and bigger after the 7th of October. That's about our work. If in the field and in our documentations and our work in the field, we've been affected very hardly because of the restrictions of movement, first of all. There is more than 1,000 checkpoints and the closures, gates in the West Bank in order to move from place to place, take you hours to reach. And in many cases, you cannot reach. For example, if you live in the city of Nablus and there is something happened in Aqraba, sometimes you cannot reach Aqraba, which is a few kilometers from Nablus. And the same in Hebron and in any other area inside the West Bank. That's one thing. Other thing, the amount of the violence carried out by the army and by the settlers make the movement almost impossible in many cases. The third thing, we run for many years our video project, which is 200 Palestinians holding cameras from B'Tselem and documenting different human rights violations run out by the soldiers and by the settlers. After the 7th of October, especially, they cannot hold the cameras. And in many cases, they broke the camera, they arrest the guy which he used the camera. For example, for me and my colleagues in the ground, when we stop in the checkpoints, we don't say that we are working for B'Tselem. If I say that I work for B'Tselem, I will pay a high price for that by not by a direct way. Say that because you are B'Tselem, but when they know that you work for B'Tselem, they start to make the life more complicated for you. And in many places, in Hebron, for example, our colleague Manal in South Hebron Hills, Nasser, because they know in these areas, they've been targeted many times by the army and by the settlers. Even they've been arrested more than one time, especially Nasser in Susia, because this area, there's many settlers there and everybody know him. So it's happened. Plus that, there is dialogue and talk about new laws in order to block our work. The taxation law, which means that 80% from the foreign donations to the organization must go as a tax for the state. That means that they will close us. And the other law, the law of the ICC, that if you publish anything can be benefit for the ICC without sending that by direct way, you can be punished for 5 years in the jail. So they try to block our work, they try to shrink our space, but we continue doing our work and we will continue struggling.
And those two laws haven't been legislated yet. They are in the process of. So we're in a constant kind of threat also from the legislative body, from the parliament. And we know very well the moment they want to shut us down, they just push it and it will happen. But that's part of what it means to work under, and I would say extremely oppressive system that become more and more oppressive towards everyone under it, first and foremost the Palestinians, but then everyone who are criticizing the system.
And they start that with the Palestinian organizations that they closed and in the
Yeah, and that's also
Trump
that.
administration continue that.
Yeah, and that's also something that we see in Israel and we see in the US, because again, the US is fully recruited. The current administration is fully recruited by Israel to mark our colleagues. People were fighting, daily fighting in non-violent struggle for liberation of the Palestinians, just like us, to mark them as terror organization, or to put sanctions of them that basically the American sanctions are that's the ultimate crackdown on organization. That's a death sentence for NGOs, right? You can't survive with it. And that's also something that characterizes this time that we're in. This kind of, how do we react to that effort to break us one by one? To start with the Palestinian, with organizations like El-Haq and PCHR and Adamir and others that are, again, our colleagues that we know and we appreciate their work, and they are people who believe in non-violent struggle, and to start by and protecting human rights, and start by them, and then widen the circle. And we know that we're also on the target, but I have to say, I'm sure that every person that believes in the same idea is also going to be the target, because that's how this mechanism works, of this fascist mechanism. It's just widening and widening.
Like we have intersectionality among the fascists too. They have their own version of intersectional
Definitely.
politics, and they do each other's work.
And they learn from each other. And I'm very ashamed to say that Israel is a very
Good teacher.
It became a very good teacher for the fascists of the world to learn from.
I guess we're out of time. Fortunately, I know there are questions, and I apologize to those of you online and in the room who didn't get to ask your questions, but thank you so much for really, really rich discussion. As upsetting as it is, it's absolutely an important report and a necessary conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all. Just to say one sentence again, we are here. We see it, and the reason we're here is first of all because the violence haven't stopped. It just keep going. But the second thing is because we really see it as a struggle that is not only ours. And the only way, I truly believe that the only way we'll get to a better place is if we really be able to kind of shift our minds and to grasp that this is a joint struggle that is hard at the moment. It's going to get harder and harder probably, but the only way we can do it is doing it together. So thank you for being here and for this discussion. It's long from our side.